Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Outspoken 101. I'm your host Kyle. With me today are two amazing people from the Salle Debate Society. Please introduce yourselves for the record. For the record, wow, very attorney. Please introduce yourselves for our listeners. Let's go.
Hello, hi, I'm Therese Henota. I'm currently what's my position again? The Executive Vice President for Administrative Affairs of Salle Debate Society. Yeah, so with me today is Jill. Jill, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm July Cordo, the current president and team captain of the LaSalle Debate Society.
Yeah, it's wonderful having you on this show. I think one of the reasons why I asked the two of you to be here today is the fact that we organized two separate events on the same weekend. And usually it's, oh, so you're competing with one another. But when I was talking to you, Jill, the other week, you were very encouraging. And I just felt like this is the kind of wholesome vibes that we need in like the debate community when it comes to organizing stuff. So I guess my first question would actually be like, what drew the two of you into debating? I don't know if you were a child when you started debating, like what drew you into it? And I feel like this includes like a lot of work, right? Organizing events and stuff like that. So there must be a reason why you were here in the first place. And I'd like to ask, what was that reason for you?
All right. So actually, it's a bit of a funny story because I came into LaSalle at the time when everything was online. And so I wanted to join like Model UN. But the thing is, they weren't opening their applications in term one. So what I did was I looked around and someone was promoting the Salle Debate Society had open applications in our group chat for I don't know the economic students of LaSalle, and so I decided why not. So personally, I really like exploring ideas and pushing them to the limit, reading about different kinds of things. But I'm quite a shy person, or at least I'm not very confident in myself. So I thought it was also the perfect experience to move past my comfort zone and just do things differently in college. Yeah. So I guess that's what drew me to debating. How about you, Jill?
So I'm not sure if you know this, Cal, but like this goes back all the way in high school since before in SBCP when you were still coaching us. So I had this at the time I was like grade 8. I had this classmate who would always recite, who's like super confident, like still my idol till today and is still very active in the debate circuit, which is Kizon, like we love her, Ateneo Debate Society. Woo! So yeah, we used to be classmates. Like Bessie or Bea was very open in terms of discussing like everything that was going on in her life, especially at the time in what org she was joining. At the time, she was a theater kid. And then by grade 9, she ended up joining the St. Paul College Pasig Debate Varsity or SPCP Debate Var, and then started recruiting people. And I was like, you know what? Let's try it out because this person is like super cool, super friendly, and is also super confident. And I want to be able to emulate types of vibes. So, like, the encouragement that I received from Bessie, as well as the mindset to wanting to become a better person, really pushed me into trying out new things, particularly joining debate. And lo and behold, that's when I got in. And that's also where I met like you and Nina and everyone else.
I do understand like a lot of people enter debate because either they wanna be lawyers or they're frustrated like theater kids, or yeah, those are the two trends that I see most of the time. Bessie was a theater kid. I cannot act, but I wish I could, stuff like that. With respect to Model United Nations, are you in Model United Nations?
No, my debate has completely taken over my life. The only other org I have right now is the LaSalle. And actually, Jill and I both. And we're this close to getting kicked out because we don't show up face to face in their meetings. We just do the work that's assigned to us, but we're like practically ghosts in the organization.
We do our work.
Yeah, we do our work. We do our work. So, yeah. So the LaSallian is the school paper.
Yeah, when I started debating, my coach told me that debate is very jealous because if you try doing something else, you're like, why are you no, train. And that has been true for me for more than a decade of my life. So the next question is, how did you find yourselves in your respective positions in LSDS? What are the challenges that are involved here?
Maybe you want to go first. This is a funny story.
Okay, this goes way back. Wait, I'll first talk about how I got into LaSalle Debate Society, because that adds into why I got into my positions in the first place. So when I was like in my senior year going into college, I was like, I'm gonna retire from debate. I'm so tired of debating, like competitive debating. Like, for context for the viewers, I have been debating since 2017. That's a long time considering that it's 2023 right now. So I was like, I'm tired. Next thing I know, when I wake up, one of the older members from the LaSalle Debate Society at the time, messaged me. Note that I just woke up. Says, "Hey Jill, are you interested to join the LaSalle Debate Society?" I guess my subconscious, like my sleepy brain, was like, yeah, did not think it through, did not think about the existential angst I was going through when I said I was going to quit debate. And then I got into debate, and eventually I couldn't find a way out of the LaSalle Debate Society. So I was like, okay. At the time in which I entered the LaSalle Debate Society, I think like there were a lot of influences that made me want to run for a position in the executive board or in the executive committee in order to change things. Because if I'm going to remain in an organization in a sport that also beats you down eventually, especially when the going gets tough, I'd rather exist in an organization that is, I don't want to say tailor fit, but more of, I wanted to fix the environment in which I was going to continue debate in. So that's why I wanted to get into the position. I wanted to be able to change cultures. I wanted to change the way that, at least at the time, LaSalle Debate Society was approaching debate. So that was, I got into the position of, like, I first started out in pubs. So I started doing pub work and then getting to know a lot of people in admin. And then eventually it elevated to me running and winning the position of vice president of admin affairs, which is Tara's position now. And then after the VP admin affairs, like I went through it, I was like, I don't want to be in Exicom anymore. But then Worlds Belgrade happened. And in the middle of Worlds Belgrade, I submitted my COC to run for the captaincy and the presidency in LSDS, which is very, it was a, how do I say this? It was a overthought decision, given that I was also I was juggling a lot of commitments at the time, and there we go. I won the elections, and I'm here now.
We're still with the elections.
Okay, there.
I think it's super funny that you mentioned elections because literally the last time we were talking in person, Jill, we were actually talking about election law. So when you brought up like, oh, I filed my COC, I just got like war flashbacks to election law about, oh, what are the grounds for disqualification? What are the grounds for the cancellation of
Filipino
a
citizenship.
Oh. How about you, Tara? How about you?
Yeah, so for me, actually, my story of being a part of the Execom in LaSalle Debate Society is quite intertwined with Jill's story. Because in my first year, I was a very scared. I was a fresher, not just in LSDF, but the debating community in general, because I just started in college, diba? So everything was scary to me. The EB were so far away, like the great, like at the time we were the varsity debaters. It was like the time Tony, Taking, Hans Wong, Ken Luna. Those were like the seniors at the time. And it was so scary to me. But then at the time, they were organizing Nash DC 2021. And I wanted to give back to the organization that has put a lot of investment in me very early on in my debate career because all these seniors helped me out. And so I did some stuff for Nash, like some admin work. And then the following year, Jill was VP for admin affairs. Jill recruited me to be an assistant vice president. So I helped Jill out with a lot of the day-to-day admin affairs in LSDS. And that included as well organizing LaSallian Interschool Training last year, and then Nash DC last year as well. So now, because I'm way too deep in it, I just ran for VP admin. And so I'm here. I'm the current vice president for admin affairs.
I think it's kind of hilarious that the pipeline here is I was forced to do it, and now that I'm doing it, better keep doing it. Because honestly, that is my personal debate story. Like, I was just told one day I was actually supposed to try out for the swimming varsity, and then I was told by teachers, hey, you should go to the faculty conference room. And I was like, oh no, am I in trouble? because I used to always get into trouble. And then when I got there, there were a bunch of nerds there, and I felt like I was just like an intervention or something. And then I couldn't leave because it was too awkward to just leave. And that's how I started debating. That was an orientation, and they made me debate about PE, and then I super duper sucked. And 12 years later, Jill, you were saying that like you were debating since 2017. I had been debating for 7 years when you had started debating. Okay. So can you imagine? So considering those things, Tara, you mentioned that you started this because, I mean, you ended up in that position because you were tapped on to do administrative and organizational work. So I want
Yeah.
to ask you of you now, what were the most challenging aspects of organizing debate events, and how have you overcome it? Because one of the reasons why I feel like a lot of teams or a lot of organizations might feel hesitant to organize their own stuff is because they don't have an accurate picture of what the challenges would be involved in the process of planning and organizing debate events. So could you tell us like what are those challenging aspects and how can you overcome them?
I think the most challenging aspect in organizing these debate tournaments, especially for someone who doesn't have experience, is the details. And that's especially goes with, for example, like for the first time I helped out in Nash, I had no idea what was going on. Because at the time I've only attended like 5 debate tournaments at the time. And you don't really see all the like how the sausages per se in the back rooms because there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes if you're just a participant, if you're not part of Orgom. So it really was understanding how all these things work or how all the minute details of, for example, what does ad score need? Like simple things like how will motion release happen or what other
The
things like the
rooms.
rooms or maybe how the Google Forms phase 3 individual registration is arranged so it's easier for tab. So these are like the devil's in the details really to make the tournament more efficient and smoother. And I think the way I overcome came that was one, I think guidance from like seeing that's a given. But the second more important thing is really just trial and error. Because in my first lit, like I co-organized it with another person. We really messed up a lot of the registration processes. Good thing it was lit 2021 and there were like at the time there weren't that many participants. So it really was just trial and error and then observing how other organizations do it. For me, a good Orgcom learning experience was breaking down how like Orgcom organized PIDC 2021, 2022, and then NDC 2022. So how UPDS did it. So like the things with the public trackers and everything. So observing those things and applying how they made it more efficient to our own tournaments was something that really helped in like improving or streamlining the efficiency of internal and external operations. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And Jill would also agree because we struggled with the same things back in Debatable when we were organizing the Debatable tournaments. We were also like, what are we doing? And it was just like a fever dream. Like, hey, you know what? Let's make a tournament. And then I remember we also had errors in the registration where we forgot to ask for, oh, what are your Tabber emails? And we were just like, every single day for an entire week, I was just like, hey, by the way, can you please send me like email for Tabber, stuff like that. And then the next one, you're just like, okay, let's remember this. But then in the process of remembering and learning from your mistakes last time, you end up making new mistakes or you forget other things that
That's
you
true.
did the previous go ahead. So I really appreciate the recognition of the role of guidance because from my experience, like a lot of people, they don't want to start doing stuff because they don't know where to start. And so that's also one of the reasons why I'm just hypothesizing here, but I feel like that might be one of the reasons why the two of you ended up running for your positions because like you already had experience. But if it's something completely new, like this your first ever tournament, your first ever event, that might be like more difficult. So that's actually the big reason why I wanted to do this episode because I understand that a lot of debate organizations don't have that guidance. They don't know, they don't have someone to learn from. And I want us to be like the people that they can learn from there. So, my next question is moving on from that is can you share like a step by step process on how you would typically organize a debate related event?
The first thing that we ever do in organizing a debate tournament is to create what we call a concept sheet. So this is where we dump all the details related to the tournament. So things like, for example, for Nash DC, we would dump things like the details, like the
How many teams, the capacity of like teams, which thereby translates to how many rooms that we can accommodate, as well as how many we want in AdCore, because that will also determine a large chunk of the budget. And given that you already have the amount of rooms or the amount of teams that you possibly want, this also means tab team, deciding who tab team is, trying to figure out how much registration fee is given the fixed expenses that you already have, which is like having cap, having tab team. And then if you need to pay for Tabicat or for Tabtastic, that's another added fixed expense that you also need to consider. And then with those expenses, so it's like starting out with the expenses first. Like how many, that's why you start first with how many teams and how many rooms, and then how many people in CAP. So you can start planning out how much your expenses is. And then from there, that's where you can start planning your registration fee. And then from there, you start to figure out dates. So what's super helpful is that the debating community is like so rigorous in terms of date tracking, given that there's so much tournaments and people want to join a lot of tournaments, especially now in the online space or online debating, because there is such an influx of tournaments. We have created the global debating sheet, or at least the debate community has created the global debating sheet. So you can see from there which dates specifically are when certain tournaments or certain debate related events are going to happen. Usually the no-go dates are really just majors. If there is a relatively big intervarsity, like it's a legacy event that a lot of people attend, you also have to consider those things. Or perhaps it's like regionals or nationals. Those are dates that you have to consider, that you have to move your own event to or adjust your event to, considering that's going to affect not just your participant pool, but even the judges that you can acquire for the tournament that you need.
Yeah, so the second step to that. So that's the first step, right? So that's conceptualization.
I'm just
which
like
is
taking down notes.
I'm sorry. I am
Go.
sorry. Conceptualization is a whole different piece. But the second step is, I think this is especially emphasized in Jill's and I terms as Vice President for Administrative Affairs, is we look for people. And the basis for this is their performance and like their dedication to the organization. Because we want the biggest complaint before about being part of Orcom of a tournament. Running a tournament is like a very selfish thing for the conveners because it's a very CV padding thing for the people, for the tournament director. But what about the people who are like at
Their branches,
the committees or
Yeah,
the
no.
so we make it a point to get people who we want to invest in as the future of the organization. So possibly people who might be candidates for future Execom. And they're also good. So they're also dedicated, they're also good. And then what we do is we list down, or together with their help, we list down all the tasks for each committee and put it in a tracker. And then we orient the organizing committee. So the principle here is we decentralize the work. So we give like the committee heads or the people we've chosen to help lead the tournament the autonomy to implement this and to assign deadlines within their own committees. And I think this not only makes it easier for Orcom because the work is far more distributed, but we also want to give people the opportunity to have leadership positions of their own to develop themselves so that they also get something out of being part of the organizing committee and not just like for the organization or for the tournament directors. Yeah. And then basically just that's the principle all the way up to the tournament.
I just want to add to that. So if you want a parallel, it's like local government autonomy. Yeah, decentralize the power. Sorry, I just had to make that. I also want to note that the decentralization structure of organizing a tournament, at least in LSDS, was relatively new.
Yeah, it is.
Because at the time that this was implemented, I was still like a person that was in pubs. Like it started out when our previous president before me, Christine Barbosa, she wasn't president at the time. She was only the AVP or the assistant vice president for the VP admin, and she was the one that implemented these types of structures. So given that I was under her at the time in which we were hosting Nash DC 2021, that eventually translated to how the rest of like our VP admin terms would implement Nash DC and the rest of the tournaments and events that LSDS or LSDS people would be hosting. Structure is very important, especially if you want to be able to incentivize people to join your organizing committee. Like, they need to find some sense of value to be able to dedicate this amount of time for a tournament that they are not necessarily getting paid for, given that a lot of the organizing committee work that we do in LSDS is not paid, and most of the money goes back to paying IAs and all our expenses. But secondly, it's also so that, what was I going to say? Beyond, it's also so that you have like less stress as a convener. Like, the VP admin during Barb's time, which was Desher. Desher.
God bless Desher Peña.
Yeah, Desher Empeño also, he used to be active in debate, was having a very difficult time, given that they were taking 2 degrees, was like gunning for Latin, but was also trying to organize a tournament by themselves. Like, Lit 2020 was only organized by one person.
2021.
No, was it 2021? The one with the plants?
Yeah, 2021. That's 2021.
Okay.
Anyway,
Lit 2021. Sorry. The details. Like, Lit 2021 was only organized by one person, and that was Desher. And I don't know how, like, Desher planned out everything. I don't know how they did it. And I don't know how they were able to take on that stress, given that even now we're also stressing out about organizing Lit. It shouldn't be a one-man show, because that's just not very healthy for you, especially if you have other commitments in life. So yeah, that's the second step, the organization. Is there a third step?
So the third step is just pray for the best at the tournament. And yeah, like, exactly, pray for the best, because you've planned everything, and then as a convener, it's your job to make sure everything falls in place at the tournament. And there's nothing more to it than to just make sure everyone's doing their job. And if there are fires, put out the fires as best that you can, and be transparent as much as possible to your org members and to participants as to what is happening. So yeah, that's basically a 3-step process. Make it sound so easy.
In addition to that, I think, like, if you are the types that you ought to consider. So if you are a debater, what type of tournament do you want to be able to experience? And as a convener, like, having that type of mindset that this is a tournament that you want to experience, this is where you start to realize that I want to have the best tournament. If I were in the debater shoes, I want to be able to make sure that this tournament is the most enjoyable tournament that exists. There's less hassles whatsoever. So that's the first mindset that you have. The second mindset, especially if you are a convener, is everything that will go wrong.
Oh.
Murphy's Law. Yeah. So, like, always create backup plans. Or if you do not have backup plans, make sure that you know something about damage control when the going gets rough.
I have a funny story here, but I don't know if maybe we're overtiming on this question or what. Yeah. So, funny story, Nash DC 2022, I almost, like, metaphorically died because the tab team that we hired did not show up for round 1.
Oh, yeah.
That was a moment. The tab team that we hired did not show up for round 1. So we were contacting them for briefings, like, where are you? Where is the tabby cat? Because we didn't have access to the tabby cat. We gave them the money, and then we knew they created one because they sent it to us, but we don't have the login details for the administrator access. And so what we did was, during the briefings, we got 2 people from UP Debate Society, Joash.
For the debatable tournaments, and for this tournament, the Outspoken tournament this weekend, it's also Joash. Right?
Yeah, they also tab for LSDS, so it's amazing. So we tapped them, and what we did was, for round 1, we transferred the entire tournament to Tabber.
When Tabber was still alive.
So we transferred the entire tournament to Tabber. So we told everyone, okay, guys, we're sorry. Like, this is what happened. Our tab team ghosted us. So we're transferring the entire tournament to Tabber. So round 1. So while round 1 was ongoing, the tab team that originally hired showed up. They showed up. And they were late because they were from a different time zone, and they got the time zones wrong. So what we did was, after round 1, we transferred everyone back.
To be fair, in fairness, despite the supposed, like, you'd think those would cause delays. That day, we did not have any delays.
We did not have any delays because we accounted it for the schedule.
Yeah.
And everything went well. We just, like, it was just a weird moment, I guess, for the debaters. They had to tabber, and then now Tabicat.
Yeah.
But it was not a good start to like the high school AP nationals, but it ended well naman. Like everything else, the tournament went smoothly. So yeah, that's the thing. So it just really had to be calm and to look for as many alternatives, as many plan Bs up to plan Zs as much as possible. So yeah, so that's the funny story
Yeah.
about Nash 2022.
I think that you should also give yourself like the space to make mistakes. Ah, man, we didn't account for the time zone difference. And I remember in one of the debatable tournaments, the first one, I think, debatable open, right? We had forgotten to set a time zone or announce the time zone at which the registration forms would close. So you will get messages from people like from different countries going, hey, I tried to register, but I couldn't because the form was closed. I'm like, oh crap, sorry. We forgot to mention it's GMT+8. But all right, let's yeah. And also, I think actually one of when you said ghosting, I think now you should probably also have a backup plan for ghosters. And maybe it's my law brain, but I think make a contract, have them sign a contract. And if you ghost us, I swear to God, if you ghost us, we're gonna sue you. We're gonna sue you. Yeah, one of your steps was like, oh, let's tap people who will be orgcom and sit down with them and have this decentralized structure. I think that I we need to emphasize like the quality of that alignment talk, right? Because they might be doing some stuff that are inconsistent with the objectives of the organization when it comes to planning this event, or they might do some stuff that will inadvertently mess up some other part of the planning process, right? So I think that while you are doing the alignment talk, it needs to be like structured as well, right? Like here are our objectives, like here is how we're going to tell if we're succeeding or we're failing. And like maybe here you can also talk about, okay, so what are the steps generally that people do when they're in this committee, right? And so this can also be part of providing guidance. But another thing that I want to mention is actually this was something that really piqued my interest because you mentioned that organizing a tournament is something that you can use to pad out your CV. And I don't know if it's just like my own background where that doesn't really matter. What matters is did you do well in law school and stuff like that. They're not gonna ask you when you're entering a firm going, yeah, so how many events have you organized? My question is how important really is organizing a tournament or being part of the organizing committee to a curriculum vitae or a resume?
In my case, this is where I'm going to talk about my little experience in the workforce. So even in high school, I used to work on their NGO. At the time that I was also balancing out debate stuff, I was also part of IdeaCom or IdeaCore at the time as well. So
What's
um,
idea for?
IdeaCore, like Interscholastic Debate Association,
Oh, that's an
Idea.
NGO? I guess.
No. Idea Core, and like I was working in another NGO, like under another NGO.
Oh, okay.
So like those are two separate matters. So the way that I pitched myself to volunteer, because you are assigned to different departments and you don't really pick and choose your departments. You can specify what you want to be in, and like the roles, but it's not always a guarantee because people can assign you other places given that's their management prerogative. So the way that I was trying to sell myself to opt into certain positions and to opt into certain departments was to talk about all the experiences that I did as a person at the time in high school who was organizing events like different IDEA events, particularly the pub mats that I was doing, any of the communications, even till now, while I'm also having a part-time job in dialogy, like me being able to understand or at least being able to know the experience of hosting a tournament also allows me to better understand the necessity of deadlines, why certain outputs need to be put out at the time in which, even if they're like way before the actual tournament, given that there's a lot of revisions required. But even outside of like dialogy work, I think this was also applicable to trying out for other organizations, because like as much as org work might not be considered like very job related things. It does help. It does pad you with the soft skills that allow you to better sell yourself to employers. When I was trying out, I don't know if you call it trying out. When I was applying for the Lasallian, which is the school publication, I can't remember if I specifically noted my experience in organizing events, but I do remember being able to communicate that I knew how to manage a lot of things, given that, yeah, I did mention it, given that I did have to organize or at least help organize certain events. And that also helped me in terms of my elections as VP admin, because I put there in the slide when I was running that, oh, I have organized and contributed to 10 different debate tournaments, events, whatever, all that. So like the experience really helps in terms of being able to sell your soft skills and what you can do.
Yeah,
That's my bit.
what I would say is debate helps you sell yourself, like frame like your credentials, right? But I think that if you're going to apply to a job that involves like a lot of management, like if you're going into a managerial position, this is like crucial, right? So like debate in general can help train you in framing like the actual selling of yourself, whereas the organizing work, the orgcom work is the thing that you're selling your experience in organization, right? So I think that like most of us will want to have a job where we're at least like managerial position. Although like obviously there is like a huge amount of dignity in not being in a managerial position, like rank and file stuff. And in fact, sometimes it's even better if you're in rank and file because the labor code's provisions apply to you. This is not legal advice. I'm still not allowed to say that on a podcast. Yeah, because right, Jill and also Tara, later on, the exception to the application of the labor code is if you're a managerial employee. But anyway, I agree, and I'm very happy about your response because I truly never thought of it that way before. Because one of the things that we were struggling with in the UP Debate Society, I'm not going to say if it's right now, like I'm not allowed to say that. But at least during my time, one of the struggles that we had was like there was a hesitation to do org work stuff. And maybe like the idea that they had was like it's not worth it for them in the future. Like at least if you are debating, number one, debating is fun. So I'm not sure if the perception of org work is fun. I'm not sure about you, but I feel like for most people it doesn't seem like the fun type of work. But at least with regard to debating or judging, if you enter a field like law or something like that, and then they see that you are like a good public speaker already, they might train you more for like litigation and stuff like that, for court stuff. So yeah, I think that was really good. Of course, with going back to the original question, which is like sharing a step by step, you mentioned that there were lots of different committees, right? And like many workers under those committees. What would you suggest to smaller debate organizations if they're going to organize things and there are only like 5 of them?
I think we can really, to answer this question, we can draw on our experience from organizing Vito Cruz Open, which is technically not a Salle Debate Society tournament, but it is organized by Salle Debate Society members as like a fundraiser before Worlds. And we organized it in a very agile core team. It was like, how many people? Like 15 people, I think, were part of Orcom. And we organized it in less than a month. Like, we just went into a meeting. We realized that we needed money as an executive board, and we came out of the meeting, okay, let's hold the tournament, guys. So I think the biggest thing is to make the committee a lean but very dedicated group of people. And I think the most essential committees here, the most essential groups are: one, communications and registration, because it's very essential. Publicity.
Yes.
What else? And then logistics, at least. So technicals.
Logistics being like tech team, operations team.
Yeah.
They would also include the runner. Like, I think a lot of the load. Okay, this is where I'll add. I think organizing a tournament is significantly much easier to do alone, or at least in a smaller team online, than it is face to face. Because at the time that I was in IDEA, like I was active in IDEA, technically you only have 5 people in the IDEA core team. So this was the time where it was a bunch of high schoolers organizing high school regionals, which is insane if you think about it retrospectively. And there's a lot of bureaucracy work. But if those like 5 people were able to find like other people that were also as dedicated to have a tournament, then the manpower problem fixes itself. Yeah. What you really need is not necessarily like a lot of members in manpower. Like those help. But having a lot of people in your manpower or in orgcom doesn't mean anything if they're not as dedicated to the job, because they can just be there but they do a really bad job or they don't do anything at all. It's like having a group mate but doesn't do work, then there's no point in having a group work. It's the same thing. If a person, like at least here online, it's much more manageable if you are a smaller team, because you don't have to have like physical runners like running between rooms to rooms, checking on how rooms are. I think like having a lot of manpower is helpful, especially if you want to have quality control, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is the ultimate deciding factor as for whether or not you can host a tournament.
So it's entirely possible.
Yeah, I agree, because we've done that. I think that you bring up a great point, which is like the difference between organizing a tournament online and organizing an on-site tournament. And I remember, because you mentioned IDEA, for our listeners, because like IDEA hasn't been around in a while. Once upon a time, high schoolers made an organization where like they would organize debate tournaments, and with very little supervision from adults. So like in hindsight, I don't understand why. Actually, the surprising thing there is the fact that it survived for that long, considering that if you're a high schooler, you can't even make enforceable contracts. It's enforceable, but it's voidable because you're a minor. It's only unenforceable if both of you are minors, right? But there was one idea tournament that happened in a very fancy resort in Alabang, the Palms, I think. And it's just so crazy to me that high schoolers made that happen. But also right now, as we're transitioning to from online to on site, I think that there might be some logistical concerns there as well. Some buildings, some venues might not allow for that many people, right? So I think that my recommendation, and I'm pretty sure if circumstances were different, you might go away from this advice. But if you're just a small team, right, I feel like it's much better, easier to manage, easier to get like a return on the invested time and money if it were an online tournament as opposed to an on-site tournament. I think that on-site tournaments are much more viable if you are assured that there will be people in attendance. For example, like majors. So maybe you can start off with having online tournaments and be very reliable and do it every year. And then at some point you can transition to on-site. And by then people would have had very positive associations to that tournament and they would come back. And like maybe no, before Debatable dissolved, you were thinking like, oh, maybe one day we should have an on-site tournament naman. But another thing that I really liked was from your answers was you brought up like very important committees, very important rules, right? One of them is comms and registration. Could you describe to me what those roles look like?
So the comms and registration, or in LSTS we call it just the communications team, is responsible for creating things like the forms, registration forms, together with the tournament directors. It's very crucial because it contains the information that you will need. So if you miss out, let's say, the email or the names of people, then you're messed up. Your entire registration process is messed up. So that's one. And then they also work in liaising or talking to the people, the registrants. So communicating that, okay, here's the deadlines for XYZ, here are the invoices, etc. It's very important because the tournament rests on your ability to get the right information and the quality and the amount of money that you will also get to be able to fund your expenses and also profit to help the organization operations and other things is based on how well your registration is run. Well, you're able to quality control like the data that you have. So that's communications. For pubs, straightforward.
In addition to the registration, like I just want to posit like just one mess up on like a number can change the amount of registration fee that will be sent to you and will eventually change the way that participants will decide whether or not they should go for a 4,000 peso tournament or a 400 peso tournament.
Oh my
So like
god. Did that happen?
I don't know. I'm just citing an example. Dear God, I hope that never happens. But like you can see like just how important the details are if you were in comms. I think other committees like logistics are important as well. So logistics could fall under if it's an on-site tournament. Obviously, they are also the ones assigned to get the food. They're assigned to make sure that everyone knows where to go. Like it's very easy to get lost in a place that you do not know, so you need to have enough manpower for that. If it's an online tournament, the logistics teams it could afford to be smaller given that they'll just organize the tech. But tech is also very important. As like if someone cannot enter a Discord room or cannot speak or cannot enter a Zoom room, that can delay one room in a tournament and therefore delay the entire tournament because you're waiting for one ballot, waiting for one OA. So those types of small details per committees matter. I think another committee that also matters is equity. Like equity is generally just an important principle in debate, but ironically we didn't have equity back then, like especially during your time if I'm not mistaken, Kyle. Like equity was just non-existent.
I
can't imagine.
No, I remember I was talking to someone and like much older than me, like already a dinosaur when I was a freshman. And like they were making they're a very good friend of mine, but they're from a different time. And they were making like racist jokes, which are like I feel bad for laughing, but I know I'm also from that middle generation. So I was also laughing and I said, Uy, equity yan, equity. And then they looked at me and they said, Di mo ba alam? I was equity officer. That's what equity looked like before. Yeah, 100% agree with you on the equity stuff. And I think like another struggle with equity as a person who loves like making equity policies, right? I'm very proud of the debatable zero tolerance policy. Like it's probably the most comprehensive equity policy that we have, but it scratches an itch I have, which is like systems. Like you're designing systems that facilitate investigations and resolutions of disputes and stuff like that, which is very lawyery. Perhaps you can use, if you want to be a lawyer, you can do like equity work, and when you're applying to a firm, you can say, "Oh, I did a lot of like alternative dispute resolution." Because that's like mediation, arbitration as well, right? One of the things that I want to emphasize for comms, because it's a lot of emails, right? It's a lot of emails. One thing that's very useful is when you're making a Google form, turn it into a Google sheet and then get an extension for Google Chrome that lets you do mail merging. So the one that we used to use was YAM, YAM, yet another mail merge. And if you input like all the emails on one column and like all the other details, you can personalize each email and then it will mass send. Yeah, so you can, I think for listeners, you can look it up and then teach yourself how to use it because it's super cool. But if you are strapped for cash or for resources, I think you need to worry about the timeline a little bit here, because if you don't have money to buy like more than 50 emails a day, you will have to wait another 24 hours to send another 50 emails. So yun, like be aware of the timing. Yeah, like I need to send 150 of these emails tomorrow, so I need to buy like more email space for mail merge then. But yeah, I think that was very comprehensive as well. Like super duper thank you for all your insight there. I do want to note, because you might be worried about like, am I overtiming? Am I overtiming? I don't care. You can do whatever you want. Take as long as you need to. But going back to LIT, which happens this weekend, can you tell us a little bit about it and what makes it unique and exciting for you?
So the LaSallian Interschool Training is one of the flagship programs of the LaSalle Debate Society that has been going on for very long. It's like, I don't know how long it has been going on, but
Roughly, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say it's roughly.
is it older than me?
It's almost as old as us.
Okay.
Almost as
Yeah,
old as
it's
us.
that.
Before LIT was known as LIT, it was LSIV.
No, it's a different. I think it was different. But anyway, sorry. It was segue. LIT involves workshops and a mini tournament, and these workshops usually feature LSTS alumni or the like good debaters. So, for example, last year we had Mikey De Vega give a lecture on responses, and that was pretty fun because Mikey De Vega is the world
ESL World Champion of 2016.
And what Mikey did in their presentation was to break down and rebut the speech of Jason Dizon, who was their partner at the time they won Worlds. So it was kind of funny and very educational. So I think the unique thing about LIT is you get an insight into how these Lasallian debaters think and learn firsthand from experience on how to apply the way that the debaters see the world and win tournaments. So it's pretty cool.
The mini tournament, so I also want to notice the mini tournament that happens, which is usually at the last day of LIT, is not meant to be like an actual tournament. It's not meant for you to rack up achievements per se. It's more of a tournament where you apply the knowledge that you've learned from the workshops and the breakout room sessions and see how. So it simulates a tournament in that regard, but it's not necessarily meant there for racking up achievements. Given that the mini tournament is so small, or at least has such minimal amount of rounds, like Lit only has 2 prelim rounds and then straight to grand finals. So if we wanted to make it like an actual tournament, that would mean, or like a bigger tournament, that would mean we'd have more prelims and we'd have more out rounds. But given that Lit is focused not necessarily on the tournament side, but more on debate education side, we wanted to have that tournament aspect as a means for people to apply the learnings, because it's very easy to get debate theoretical things. If people explain it to you in lectures, you understand that, oh, this is a principle that you can run in a feminism debate, or this is something that you can do as a response, or this is the structure of how responses are. But how you actually execute it could be fundamentally different in a tournament or in like trainings. So given the newfound knowledge that you have, plus the exercises that you get through the workshops, breakout rooms, you can now combine both the execution attempts that you've had in the workshop and the learnings that you've received from the seminars through that mini tournament.
Yeah, sorry, just one last thing to add. And I think that's what Jill describes is what makes LIT unique, because I know there are a lot of, it's a great thing. There's a lot of debate education videos on YouTube. It's very accessible now. But I think what sets LIT apart is that you can actually, we have breakout rooms where people are encouraged to participate in activities that are designed by the speakers. So for example, in a breakout room or after the lecture on responses, there will be a breakout room activity where we separate the participants and they do things like a rebuttal chain or whatever that's facilitated by different senior LSTS members, as well as the speaker will be roaming around and giving comments to people. Yeah, so I think it's a good way of learning and applying the skills that you've learned from the lectures.
So I think that's super cool because one of the things that I personally struggled with when we had debate workshops in the past, because we used to have debate workshops organized by the Philippine Debate Union as well, but geared towards high schoolers. But it didn't have this element of let's do some breakout rooms or breakout sessions where you could actually do some exercises that test your understanding and application of that. And I just want to bring this up because it's something I thought of before I took my oath, which was one of our bar examiners was a debater, actually. They used to debate and they topped the bar. And I know that person specifically because how many years ago was this? 9 years ago, I attended a debate workshop where they discussed international law and the structure of the United Nations. And I remember they had a huge screen because it was in the Asian Development Bank, because it's Philippine Debate Union. They are not high schoolers. They have the resources to actually arrange that. And it was overwhelming for me because they showed like the organizational chart of the UN and it was massive. And I had no idea what to do. So I really do appreciate these kinds of initiatives where you have like activities and maybe something like in the future, maybe like when it's easier for us to design games or something like that, maybe we can make like debate training related video games. I don't know. I'm just like, this is my brain when I'm thinking about organizing stuff. I'm always like, what if you make us more gamified? I don't know. But one of the concerns that I might have is in terms of accessibility, right? So some people might not be free, or baka they have something else for that weekend, or maybe they might not be able to afford it at the time that they need to be able to afford it to attend. So what happens to the people who miss out on LIT? Do you have something like do you have something planned for those people so that they will still learn and develop their skills like that?
Okay. I think in relation to different circumstances require different responses. In the same way, different damage control depends on different damages. Like the typhoon that's incoming right now. That is a concern given that we are also hosting an online tournament or like an online event. Given that the main value of LIT is not necessarily the mini tournament in itself, but rather it is the workshops or the workshops. I think in those regards, we're likely willing to either make a recording or perhaps at least be able to inform debaters how the exercises went and what the learnings might be. But that's like a backup plan because as much as we do value accessibility, we also still have to put like a reg fee, considering that we still also have to pay back a lot of the expenses for LITs, such as staff and like everything else. However, like that's assuming the typhoon hits. If at the case, let's say other people miss out on LIT because they have other commitments. There are other tournaments that are also ongoing with LIT, such as the Outspoken tournament. I think it's the same way that you treat other debate tournaments. As much as you want to join most, if not all of them, you will have to trade off which tournaments and which events for debate or for commitments that you want to opt into. So in that regard, we're like if people miss out on lit, there's always a next year. But I understand that might turn off a lot of people, but I say it follows the same logic as for deciding which tournaments to opt into on the same weekend. There's a third thing in my head. Sorry, that was a moment. On the third thing, I know you didn't ask for a third thing, but I know I had the third thing in mind. I can't remember what the third thing was.
It's okay. Like yeah, LIT in particular is like a workshop mini tournament. But in the grand scheme of things, we think that it's not a lot of the high school debaters opt into it because it's one that geared towards novices. But we just want to mention that we're working on increasing accessibility for Nash DC 2023 this year. And that's why we plan to offer scholarships and as well as to make sure that the tournament is accessible for people who may not necessarily be able to afford the registration fee. And as well as yung starting out Nash, planning for Nash with an interest check to know like when people are available so that at least we can do our best to accommodate the local high school circuit as much as we can. Yeah.
On that note, if you haven't already and you are a high school debater that is planning to join Nash, please go to the Salle Debate Society page and check out the sensing form for Nash DC so we know.
The deadline was yesterday, but if you have any issues, you can just contact
The
us
form
on the
hasn't
Society.
happened yet.
Oh wait, I remember what I was supposed to say. So beyond that, I think there's also consideration of the days because LIT is a 3-day event. However, we also make sure this year specifically, like during Terra's administration or time, we opened up registration for individuals as opposed to institutions because we realized that there was a market where people who want to learn debate don't actually exist in a debating institution or don't
True.
exist in debate societies. And I remember, Kyle, we were talking about this, like people in Outspoken, like the students in Outspoken, some of them may not necessarily come from institutions that have debate societies. And that kind of idea, like the idea of being able to cater to those interested in debate but do not exist in a society or organization that would allow them to join different debate events, those were people that we wanted to cater to. So that's why we have separate registration for individuals and for observers and as well as team registrants or those interested to go to the tournament. The tournament also in that regard is completely optional. Like you are not necessarily required to be in the tournament in order for you to join LIT. Like you can strictly just apply to just watch and participate in the workshops and breakout rooms as opposed to having that mini tournament. If you want to go to the mini tournament, then you can register as a team with your partner. So like those are little things, like it may be small things, but those are pathways to making debate education and debate in and of itself more accessible to people, especially those who do not have backing of organizations.
Yeah, I really like that because I think that you're 100% right that it shouldn't be something that it shouldn't be like a bundle that you have to opt into if you're interested more in the workshop rather than the tournament. But is the opposite also true? Can people just register for the tournament but not the workshop?
The opposite, we don't have a particular, it's not true. So we don't have a particular graduation that people can just go to the tournament without going to the workshop. But honestly, you can just go for everything and just not attend the workshop. Sure, that's fine with us.
They don't take
If you want,
attendance, right? Like,
yeah, we don't take attendance. Like it's live your life however you want.
Yeah, live your life. It's your money to spend.
Yes, it's your money to spend.
You can choose however you want. Let's do it.
So at the very least, we just try our best to make the barriers gradiated, so it's much less to opt into if you wanted to.
And like we mentioned earlier, lit is not very tournament focused. So if you're only going to lit because of the tournament, I think you miss out a lot of the value that at least our organizing committee is trying to put forward, which is really the educational aspect that you get from LIP.
Yeah. On that note, I think like konting platform lang rin ng Outspoken. So like, and Outspoken naman, the plan is like this. Because we wanted it to be like a developmental tournament for novices, especially our novices who are the Outspoken scholars. The next thing that we want to do is we recognize that the tournament, if it's just a tournament, is more of experience, but not necessarily the matter itself, right? So the next project I'm doing is all of the motions that will be included or set in that tournament. I am writing like packets for them, just like arguments for, and then include them in the next volume of Outspoken's debate winning arguments thing so that they can buy all of those packets for just a little bit more expensive compared to their registration fees. Like only 50 pesos more expensive. But it's right now, okay, like share ko lang yung progress ko. Right now, like I'm on like 10 motions. I do 10 arguments each motion. So I need 20 more of those packets, but it's already more than 100 pages long. And the other day I was writing one and then I ended up doing 40 pages for a single motion. That's hilarious because and I sent you a draft of this, Jill, where I said what makes this kind of packet, what lets it set itself apart from all the other packets is it's giving you more like academic theories and stuff like that. But that's enough about me. I think like it's about time that we talk about something lighthearted. Because like in my questions list, the next question was supposed to ask us like, what role do we have on the debate community? We answered that a little bit and we talked about educational initiatives. And the next one is, can you make an argument for why org work and ACADS go in hand? Do you want to add something to this? Because some people think organizing is too much work and they should focus on academic work instead. So can we make a case for why you should try to juggle them both? Like why org work and ACADS go hand in hand? And like specifically for the two of you, because Jill, you're in legal management, Tara, you're in economics. Are you applying the things that you learned in class in organizing these tournaments?
There are two things that I will say. One, and this is the most relatable thing that I think both me and Tara and everyone else in the debate community, especially those who are really geared to ACADS, could apply. It's a coping mechanism. Honestly, if you are the type of person that is super gun-ho on academics, you also are likely to be the person to cope by distracting yourself. If you have a lot of problems, you have issues, the way that you cope is usually by distracting yourself by putting in work, such as to your academics, and by extension, also your organizing work. And that would lead to like orgcom. I think at the time in which, at least ever since I was in high school, and I was like not only debating, I was also doing IDEA core work or IDEA work. the way that I really I had to keep up that momentum of being productive, even if it is at the expense of overstressing me and like me going into the bad aspects of hustle culture. And I'm not gonna say that hustle culture is great, because I understand very well that it is not great. But there's a point in your life where you really need to keep up momentum, because at the point in which you lose momentum to be productive, everything is likely to fall apart, not because of like mental health reasons, but because you're just like the type of person that needs to keep up that energy, or else once that energy to do something productive goes down, that will just go barrel down and it will take a long time for you to recover. I'm that type of person. Like, if I want to be productive, I need to sustain that productivity, which is why I keep going, which is why right now I am like heading an org. I am like also a part-time graphic designer. I also do commissions on the side if I am free. I am also taking my academics, my legal management. I am also doing my thesis. Like, I am taking 21 units this term, while also being active in debate and managing all the organizing committee. I think org work goes hand in hand with ACADS insofar as it is a coping mechanism. That is the first thing. The second thing that I would say is, this is like a personal thing for me. I think it adds a lot of value to your life. Like, I am the type of person where it's very hard to find self-satisfaction just by yourself and happiness. I like, not to sound like I need external validation, but I need like some ways to quantify and qualify the things that I'm doing and how they matter. And I do that by producing output. I know that's bad, because that seems very utilitarian. Like, I am only as worth as how much output and utility I am to other people. But it's a mindset that has been ingrained to me since childhood. So I need to like really, and I've internalized that. So there's nothing I can do about it now. So seeing how other people enjoy tournaments, or seeing how I can make other people like enjoy debating as much as I do by creating tournaments or by organizing and helping tournaments be as successful as they are, really puts things into perspective in terms of why I value debate. It's very hard to explain to someone why debate might matter to you. If you tell them, oh, I'm in debate, I talk about international relations, some of the weird things in pop culture. Like, sometimes they'll just be amazed at how nerdy you are, or just amazed that, wow, you can really speak well, even if it's for the stupidest reasons or the stupidest topics under the sun. But there's more value to debate. It's really the experience. It's as you mentioned before when you were talking about art, or at least when you were giving a lecture on art back when I was in high school. It's an experiential good. Like, you can't just have debate and just observe it. You need to experience it. And how the experience goes really determines how much you're likely to get invested. For me, being able to organize tournaments or helping with that experience really makes me realize that there's more value to debating than just things like winning or things like ranking in tournaments or doing well. It's really about sharing that good vibes that you feel, just being in a debate society, being in a tournament, and then making new friends. So yeah, that's two things.
Yeah. For me, I think the vein of my everything what Jill said, yeah, sure. Same thing, same thing. But the vein of like the way I see org work and ACADS, why they're so intertwined, is basically to ask yourself the question is, what kind of person do you want to be in the future, and what kind of future do you want to have? And I think it goes to show for everyone that we all want to be someone who has some level of success, so that they have more ability to pursue the things that are meaningful to them. And I think it is when you have a variety of experiences. So you have academics, you also have soft skills that you learn from organization or work. So maybe project management, communication, working in a team, all those things make you a more well-rounded person that makes it easier for you to deal with challenges as you move past school and go into the workforce and go on with the rest of your life. So I think that's why it's very important to have both in your life. And I would dare say argue sometimes one is more, or extracurriculars can be more important than the other.
If your extracurricular is enough to like earn you money or give you more opportunities in life than your actual academics. And think about it. Like, the reason why you get an education and a degree in the first place is because it is that is your prerequisite to get opportunities in life. That is your prerequisite to get a job, and thereby a requisite for you to be able to afford and sustain yourself. But if you have activities that can also end with the same outcomes, albeit unconventional from getting a degree. I think like you still get the same benefit. Like it gets to the same outcome. So you get the same benefit. Like personally, I would not have started like being able to do commissions, being able to earn like as little as I do without the debate community. Like the first time I ever got commissioned was actually by you and Nina, like back in high school, where you guys asked me to make the debatable podcast cover, which I charged, as I remember correctly, like 200 pesos or 300 pesos for the cover.
Yeah. I remember you were saying like, really? You sure you don't want higher than this? And you're like, no, I swear it's okay. And it's like, okay.
Yeah. So after that, like everything just started to rack up in terms of the opportunities. A lot of the people that end up commissioning me are also debaters or people that know that I end up doing art stuff on the side. And even my part-time job now is really because I was referred to by Nina to my current boss. So like it's those types of things, like the networking, the opportunities, like I'd say that's the case in which extracurriculars could be more valuable than academics, assuming that they end up incurring the same outcomes and benefits that you wanted in your pursuit of a degree. But that's not to say that you should not be studying.
Yeah, of course.
like this
No,
is.
no,
I just
don't
want to put that
study.
out there. That's a disclaimer. This is not to say that you should just abandon your
Yes,
ACADS.
Jill and I study very hard.
No, don't study. I always says, don't do it. And like my subtitle is, this is not a joke. Do not study. It's not. I think another perspective to consider would be like, it encourages you to look for different ways to apply what you're learning in your ACADS as well. So I remember like one of the things that I was thinking of when I was organizing some sort of debate related activity was, you know what? I realized you don't have enough market information on registration fees. Someone should get to work on that to see like willingness to pay in terms of like registration versus what product you're giving. And that's made me realize, you know what, if I had enough time to make debate a full-time job, I should probably try to get more data on like the spending habits of debaters as consumers. And when I was in law school, I realized, oh, we have a lot of online tournaments. Ghosting is a very big deal. Maybe we should create contracts that ensure their participation. Or when we were making the zero tolerance policy, we realized, oh, wait a minute, if you say that someone is a harasser, doesn't that mean that they can sue you? And that's the reason why at some point I was like, okay, let's write a waiver, let's make like a legal document that like serves as a quit claim, like you can't sue us for just applying in good faith our tournament policies. So yeah, I think like it's a skill, right, that you learn, like trying to find the connections between your academic load and organizing tournaments or anything actually. Finding those connections is a skill in itself. So you have to consciously try to connect those things in the same way that when you're trying to connect like seemingly irrelevant information to a debate motion so you can find like a creative argument, that's also a skill that you can train. So now let's talk about just irrelevant stuff. If you could debate any historical figure, like challenge them to a debate, who would it be and why?
Do you want to?
No, I don't have any historical figure in mind yet. What about your favorite economist?
No, I would not want to debate my favorite economist because I agree with them. Who is Esther Duflo? But anyway, that was a sidetrack. I think actually this is a pretty corny answer, like a really grade 8 high school answer, grade 7. I want to debate to Sarisal. Yeah, because bakit nga ba? Aside from the fact that it probably would be an interesting experience to debate against yourself. We one time and we had a class called Readings in Philippine Economic History. And a few of the readings that they had us read were a bunch of research papers about Rizal's economic writings, which I think was really fascinating because he had some writings about like the letters to the women of Malolos, Bulacan, and he had a bunch of the body of work describing how political institutions help shape incentives in the Philippines, and that actually predates like why nations fail by 100, 150 years. So I thought that was really interesting, and I'd love to talk with him or debate with him on various topics related to the issue. So yeah.
So econ pala siya. Like you want to debate about economics?
Yeah, definitely.
Actually, on that note, do you think of how do you think of Jose Rizal? Because I remember like someone from SPCP also asking like, "Hey Kyle, are you more of a Bonifacio? Are you more of a Rizal?" And I was like, "I'm more of a Rizal," and they were like, "Ah, really?" And I was just like, "What's wrong about Rizal? Would you consider yourself to be more of a Bonifacio or more of a Rizal?" And assumes the split of like a revolutionary versus a reformist.
Oh my God, Rizal. I don't know. I don't venerate Rizal. Of course, everyone has flaws. But I think reading about his economic writings really struck me like, wow, this guy is really smart. And a really fascinating way, multi-dimensional way of seeing the world. So yeah, I think maybe I'm a more of a Rizal person. Oh, Jill.
I don't have a historical figure in mind, but I will just mention one of the philosophers that stuck in my head, which is Emmanuel Levinas. Emmanuel Levinas is the dude that, sorry, he was like super formal. I don't know if you heard the bell. Sorry, you were still in school.
No, we didn't
So,
hear the bell. It's fine.
sorry. Okay, so Emmanuel Levinas is very religious person who created the same concept that you were actually talking to me that one time, Kyle, which is called the face of God.
Yeah.
Particularly about how if you perceive God's face, then he loses all the traits that make him transcendent and divine. Because the assumption, the characterization of being a transcendent being assumes that that this person, this being and entity, cannot be perceived, cannot exist in our minds because the plane of existence, like our means to be able to perceive him as an existence means that there is no such characterization of transcendency in the first place, because the fact that you can perceive him means that they aren't necessarily outside of that plane of existence that you were talking about. They are actually someone that you can perceive. I remember we were talking about this at one point.
Yeah.
Emmanuel Levinas was the person that argued it, and it's very interesting to me, like when you read his biography, that despite developing that theory, because he's like a lot of his papers still cater to what the face of God looks like, or the face of such a great existential being, he still remains heavily religious. And to me, that's very interesting, given that if you agree, or if your theory is that you should not be perceiving God, given that your perception of God is no longer God, given that is your own creation, your own perception, then isn't that just by that logic really just believing in your own delusions? Like, I don't know, or believing in what you want to believe in, which I think is like a core part of religion, because religion in and of itself, you can't always say that this is factual. Like, religions will always disagree what is fact, what is theory, and what is just plain out religious beliefs. And the reason why I want to be able to have that discussion with him, not necessarily debate, is trying to understand how he reconciles his own personal beliefs about God, because he was a very religious Christian, and also for him to be able to write about the face of God, and how you shouldn't, how you perceiving him is not really God. It's ironic, given that the perception of God, like at the time that he wrote that book, that writing that essay of the face of God, there were a lot of critics, like especially religious critics, that were just like, ooh, like they were really offended, which I could understand why. But to him, he was still able to maintain both his religious belief in a God and also be able to critique him. I think that is a very interesting person to discuss with. Yeah. As for the second thing, as for whether or not I'm a Rizal and Andres Bonifacio, I think you have to consider the historical context of the Philippines at the time. Jose Rizal was a reformist in the sense that he did not want to break away from colonization from Spain. What he wanted instead was for the Philippines to become another state under Spain, but not necessarily. And honestly, I do not not understand like the specific nuances. I just know that we're still under the control of Spain. It's just that we have more freedom than at the time in which we were still being colonized by them, as opposed to just Bonifacio, who wanted complete freedom. And their pathways to how they get there is different. Just Bonifacio being like quote unquote more violent, Jose Rizal being more, let's write books, let's like stimulate the knowledge and brains of people. I think given the context, I would also be a Jose Rizal person. Not because I don't believe in things like violence, not because I don't believe in things like freedom as Andres Bonifacio did. Contrary, I do think like both Jose Rizal and Andres Bonifacio wanted to fight for the same thing, and that was for the Philippines. How you wanted to better the Philippines really depends on your specific standpoint. I guess given the background of Andres Bonifacio, he cannot fathom a world where the Spaniards would treat them better given all his own personal experiences versus Jose Rizal, who was relatively privileged to be able to study abroad, to be able to study among the elite. And that's why he was probably more okay with conformist types of strategies in terms of being able to get forms of freedom for the Philippines. I think in consideration to that, like I don't think violence at the time was the best way, given that the Philippines was already incapacitated by a lot of the systems by the Spaniards. And even if you try to brute force your way to freedom, that's probably just going to end up with more lives lost as opposed to the conformist strategy of Jose Rizal, where even if we may not get the tangible forms or the tangible experience of actually being free, at the very least, we are still able to make sure that that there are people that are still alive. At least people are aware that these are things that are happening, and eventually, information and knowledge gets transferred to the next generations. And hence the reason why we still read Noli Metangere and a lot of other Jose Rizal books.
I think for context, like when Fel asked me this years ago, when I responded, "Oh, Rizal, I'm more of like a Rizal," what I meant was like, "Oh, I like writing more than fighting." That's what I. If I was there, I would probably have written about like why we need revolution more than actually fighting in the revolution, like a Thomas Jefferson type thing where he didn't actually fight. Like he got so much credit for like independence. Like you just wrote the paper. We're just sitting down. Like that would be me. But the reaction just made me go, wait a minute. I feel like I need to defend myself now. And so I've come to realize from my studies, because I also read like the letters that he wrote to Blumentritt. He was saying that, and this also dispels some misconceptions about Rizal, because my belief is that he was both a reformist and a revolutionary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, he was saying that, oh, Spain, you should probably make these reforms so that life is better for Filipinos. But when he wrote to Blumentritt, he said that those who Jupiter wants to strike down, he first makes mad or makes crazy. And he was saying that, yes, we need to ask these very reasonable reforms from Spain, knowing that they will not give us those reforms. And that would just give us more moral high ground to justify a revolution eventually. So it was like a two-tiered plan on the part of Rizal. And like I do generally believe this because one of the arguments against Rizal was the retraction controversy when he wrote like a letter from the jail cell saying, "Oh, yeah, forget everything I said. I hate these guys. Bonifacio, ew." But I don't really I think that was like forged or some conspiracy. But the reason why I believe that it's not real is because he did it allegedly he did it so that Spain would treat him better before dying, but he was still executed and he's still in an unmarked grave. So I think that if they did make a deal, they would have honored that deal instead of putting him in an unmarked grave. So ayun, the person that I wanna debate is also a philosopher who is Thomas Kuhn. He's a philosopher of science because he was the one who said that the way that we understand the world is also dogmatic, even in science. And to that extent, I agree. You have observations in the world, and then you can use different scientific theories to that would match the same observation. And so for a long period of time, like we believe that the earth was the center of the universe versus like people who say that the sun is the center of the universe. But the problem was, regardless of which theory you believed in, the stars moved in the same way, like the sun moves in the same way as well. And the observations that were available to you supported both theories. And so Thomas Kuhn said that between those two paradigms, you can't really compare one or the other. One isn't better than the other. He calls them incommensurable. And I remember when I took this up in class, I was like, this is dumb, isn't it? Of course, one is better than the other because one can explain Mercury retrograde and the other cannot. So you can't just make stuff up because you get to invent a word and what's the point? What's the point? Anyway, that's and my professor, he didn't want to engage with me there. And he was like, the only thing he said was like, perhaps you should have been alive when Thomas Kuhn was alive. That would have been an interesting debate. I was like, I knew it, and I'm writing on paper. So yeah, back to programming. Okay, that out of the way. To Rizal people, as president and as VP for administrative affairs, what plans do you have for your organization? Is there anything that our listeners might be excited about, whether it's like future events that you're organizing or things that they might be excited about if they want to join LSDS later?
I think our terms are ending soon because it's term 3 in De La Salle University, and we're in my position is to organize Nash DC, obviously. And I think that's something that every high school debater looks forward to. This is one of the 2 major tournaments for high school debaters in the Philippines. And I think it's very straightforward. Go to Nash. We'll do our best to make it as accessible as possible. It's still online. So for all those GDocs people, you have nothing to worry about. And yeah, so that's basically it on my end. How about you, Joe?
I would like to say that my term is ending, but the last time I said that, I was pushed into the presidency. So I'm kind of nervous if I say that I'm about to end my term. But like Teres, right? We are about to end our term. Like we are going to leave our positions soon at around August, July. But even though that we are not going to be officers, that doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't going to be in the org. And I think that is one thing that I can promise to outside people or to the listeners at that case, because a lot of the projects that I do is very internal culture wise, like free major dinners, things like team building, so internal events. I think at the very least, if you are interested in joining the Salle Debate Society or plan to go to Salle and thereby extension debate in the debate org, the thing that I can promise right now is culture, like the people that you opt into, the people that you meet in the debate society. We have quite a diverse set of people. We have quite a large group of people that are very nice, very welcoming. And I will also, me and Tara, ideally should also be there to welcome you. If you're the type that would like to befriend, like you don't even need to be in LSDS to actually befriend LSDS people. I think you can still befriend people from different institutions. But if you want to be involved with us or at least become closer with us, that is completely possible joining our org, but also completely possible just befriending us through tournaments, befriending us like here right now. I can't really promise anything else beyond that given my internal, like right now at least, I'm more of an internals person. I just hope that if you do continue debating or if you opt into debating in college and you do end up in LaSalle, we do promise and we are very sure that you'll have a happy time. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's it for this episode. A few takeaways would be join Nash DC if you can, join LSDS if you can. Outspoken naman. Like join the next Outspoken tournament. We're going to announce a new one for August. That coincides with Buwan ng Wika, where we celebrate like the diversity of Philippine languages, and that should give you a hint as to what kind of tournament that we're going to hold. Yeah, so that's it for this episode. We hope to see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.